The Labour leader, Ed Miliband, has promised action to close tax loopholes after MPs criticised Google over its financial affairs. He said some multinational firms were not living up to their obligations. Google paid just £6 million in UK corporation tax in 2011, but its boss, Eric Schmidt, who's due to meet David Cameron tomorrow, claimed the company had always aspired to do the right thing. Well, in a moment, we'll be speaking to one of Google's sternest critics, the MP Margaret Hodge. First, Fatima Manji reports.
Glasses that can take pictures and make films. It's Google's latest product that wants to give you a new view of the world. But today, a whistleblower claimed to offer a new insight into the inner workings of Google. Former sales executive Barney Jones told the Sunday Times the company has a concocted scheme to avoid tax. He says Google sales staff in London would negotiate and sign contracts with British companies. Those customers would pay cash into UK bank accounts. But he alleges the deals would be technically booked in Google's Dublin office, allowing Google to record its revenues in Ireland and avoid tax here in Britain. He says he's passed on the evidence of this to Parliament's Public Affairs Committee. Earlier this week, its chair accused Google of being calculated and devious.
You're a company that says you do no evil, and I think you do evil.
In a statement to the latest claims, Google says,
"As we said in front of the Public Accounts Committee, it is difficult to respond fully to documents we have not seen. These questions relate to Google's business in the UK going back a decade or more and don't change the fact that Google pays the corporate tax due on its UK activities and complies fully with UK law."
Google would obviously much rather the headlines focused on its technology than its tax. But is the focus on the company itself entirely fair?
Pillorying multinational companies is, I think, very, very unfair. If the politicians want to change the system and to get the multinational companies to pay more tax, then the tax rules need to change.
Labour say it is time to change the laws, and David Cameron's commitment to tackling tax avoidance through the G8 leadership doesn't go far enough.
We shouldn't just sit back and say, oh, well, we tried to get international agreement, nothing can be done. We have to show leadership here, and David Cameron, if he's not prepared to do that, well, Ed Miliband has said he wants to do that.
So the pressure is on for the Prime Minister to act on tax avoidance. Tomorrow he'll be meeting here with his business advisory group, a small set of elite business leaders. Perhaps he'll be seeking advice from them on the issue, which will be interesting because a member of that group is Eric Schmidt, chairman of Google.
Whether or not they'll talk about Google's tax is still unclear.
Well, we asked the Treasury for an interview, but no one was available from there either. I am, however, joined from North London by Margaret Hodge, the Labour chair of the Commons Public Accounts Committee, who's described Google as evil. Margaret Hodge, when the Prime Minister meets Mr. Schmidt tomorrow, what do you think he should say to him?
Well, I think the first thing is he should think very carefully about which people he has around the table seeking advice on the economy. But if Mr. Schmidt is going to this meeting, I think the first question you ask him is, will you pay your fair share of tax on the profits you make from the business you undertake here in the UK?
So you think that Mr. Schmidt should be removed from the government's business advisory group, should it, from the David Cameron's group?
In the end, that's an issue for David Cameron, but if he's going to have him there, I think it's right and proper that he should ask of him whether or not he is now willing to pay a fair share of tax based on the profits he makes from the business that he's got here. If we're in the position, Cathy, where people who work for Google, customers from Google, which was the evidence we had last week, you, I, all the members of my committee think that Google is selling its advertising space here in the UK, but is accounting for it over in Ireland to avoid tax. If we all think that, I still think there's a question mark as to whether or not Google is acting within the law. We'll never know because of the confidentiality of individual taxpayers' interests. But I think it's time that the government did take tough action, and obviously part of that is doing an international agreement. We all agree with that, but we shouldn't wait for that. I think they should toughen up on how HMRC approaches these companies.
And
when we had HMRC before us last week, I would just say they were...
Yeah, the first action that the Prime Minister could take is to remove Mr. Schmidt from that business advisory group, despite his knowledge on the economy.
Well, that's an issue for him. you know, if he makes the judgment that somebody who chooses to have this is a really important market to Google. It's 10% of their profits. I think we're the biggest, second biggest or third biggest market for Google. It's important. That brings with it responsibilities from Google. It means they should pay their fair share of tax. And let me just say this: it also is.
But your leader's also cozying up to Google, though, isn't he? I mean, he's going to the Google conference on Wednesday. Should he go to that? And would his proposals today, which mainly focus on transparency and disclosure, actually make Google behave any differently?
I hope he'll give a really tough message to Google when he goes this week. And let me just say what I think should happen. I think HMRC at the moment is not being tough enough, is being too complacent, is hiding behind confidentiality. I think we need much greater transparency. I think actually we need to simplify the law. We've got a really complex tax code here in the UK, and that's what allows the loopholes to occur. And finally, I think we should do the international cooperation. But the first three actions that I talked about, toughening up HMRC, having greater transparency, and simplifying the tax code, we could do that today. And I think the government should act now, whilst, of course, negotiating both at OECD and EU level.
Margaret Hodge, thank you very much for joining me.